By request, this deck build is going to revisit Disaster Dragons, looking at a RedEyes hybrid over a pure build. One of the key points in this deck design, in my opinion, is I feel one cannot really go halfway with the RedEyes component. You either need to make the deck mostly RedEyes with Koa'ki, Drago, or just add the most helpful RedEyes components to a more pure Disaster Dragon build. Otherwise, the build seems to just produce inefficiency over both a pure Disaster Dragon build and a pure RedEyes build. Due to the hybrid nature of this deck, the discussion will go a bit differently, focusing on the cards themselves rather than the separate archetypes. Looking first at the more RedEyes heavy build, with Disaster Dragons and RedEyes, one of the immediate issues for managing consistency of the deck is to focus on the number and type of tribute monsters. To this point, I run the obvious one RedEyes Darkness Metal Dragon, along with 2 copies of the original RedEyes and 1 copy of RedEyes Black Flare Dragon. Finally, I run 1 copy of Lightpulsar Dragon for fusion and innate special summoning purposes, as well as giving Darkness Metal another quality revival target in Meteor Black Comet Dragon from the fusion summons. For the non-tribute monsters, for the RedEyes side, I run 3 copies of RedEyes Retro Dragon for defensive and offensive purposes, and 2 copies of the Blackstone of Legend. Retro's from hand effect works with another copy of Retro on the field to expand its defensive attributes, in addition to being another RedEyes target for the RedEyes support. Blackstone is nice for a quick 2400 attack point monster and deck thinning, along with being a throwaway Dark Dragon in some respects for other card effects. For the Disaster side, I run 2 copies of Koa'ki Drago and 2 copies of Keeper of the Shrine. The presence of Drago is self-explanatory, and 2 copies of Keeper helps the summoning efficiency of the tribute monster and provides nice defensive capabilities, as well as rank 4 XZ opportunities with Retro Dragon. Closing out the monsters, I run 1 copy of Glow Up Bulb for its graveyard summoning effect to increase synchro capacity, and 2 copies of Exploder Dragon for precise monster removal. Obviously, for those who want to focus more on Koa'ki, they can swap out 1 Exploder for a 3rd Drago. For the spells, I run the almost mandatory 3 copies of RedEyes Insight for the one huge advantage the RedEyes hybrid has over the pure Disaster Dragon build, in my opinion, is Insight's ability to dump Darkness Metal to the graveyard and search out a way to revive it during the next turn via RedEyes Spirit. Insight can also grab RedEyes Fusion when necessary as well. I only run 1 copy of the aforementioned RedEyes Fusion in this deck, because Fusion is a double-edged sword, as it acts as another Dragon Shrine, loading the graveyard for Darkness Metal, in addition to summoning a powerful monster. But the fact that the player cannot summon anything else during the activated turn is rather annoying. Fusion, in a lot of respects, is either a finisher card or a setup card for future turns. Do not really expect to ride it as an element of field control against any competently designed competitor deck. Most RedEyes decks do run 2 or 3 copies of Fusion, but in my experience, the Disaster Dragon attribute somewhat restricts the efficiency of this type of strategy. For the Disaster Dragon type spell support, I run 1 copy of Diamond Core of Koa'ki and some reading material, 2 copies of Book of Eclipse, and 1 copy of Book of Moon. The purpose of the books are twofold. 1, opponent play interruption and possible board breaking. 2, flipping Drago face down to turn off, in a sense, its anti-light and dark special summoning effect, because the RedEyes components of this deck definitely fall into a certain restrictive category, and Drago's presence stops a lot of the playmaking this deck can make. For the generic spell support, I run 1 copy of Raigeki, 2 copies of Return of the Dragon Lords, and 1 copy of Dragon's Mirror, along with draw power of 1 Upstart Goblin and 3 copies of Allure of Darkness. Finally, for the trap cards, I run 1 copy of Vanity's Emptiness, 2 copies of RedEyes Spirit to search off the Insight and summon Darkness Metal or some other RedEyes, and 2 copies of Ultimate Providence for graveyard setup and protection for Drago. Looking at the deck now, we have 2 spots open. These are kind of free spots. Right now, I like actually playing 2 copies of Escape from the Dark Dimension for summoning monsters banished by Darkness Metal summoning, Allure dumping, mirror-based fusion summoning, or even an opponent's effect like Dragon Buster. I think it gives a nice level of versatility and surprise for the deck, but I can certainly see someone going a more conventional route with 2 Maxis, 2 Dark Holes, or 2 Solemn cards like a Warning or a Strike, or just 2 Solemn Strikes by themselves. Obviously, Escape can be a risky card to run in this deck because there will be times when it will not have any meaningful targets, versus a card like Call of the Haunted, which will almost always have a target. But Return of the Dragon Lords and RedEyes Spirit tend to deal with the graveyard recursion fairly well. With respects to Ultimate Providence, as I said in my original Disaster Dragon build, I think it provides two useful effects. One, it provides some level of discarding from the hand when your hand is clogged with a bunch of tribute monsters. And two, the more obvious, it negates an effect. And effect negation is important for when you have Drago on the field, because your opponent isn't going to do a lot with monsters. Because if you're playing against a light or dark deck, Drago's going to shut down a lot of those monsters. So the only way they're going to get rid of Drago is through a spell or trap effect, which Ultimate Providence can help neutralize. However, similar to Escape from the Dark Dimension, I can see somebody wanting to go a different route, using another quality card that requires a discard like Twin Twister or Phoenix Wing Windblast. For the extra deck, I run one 5-headed dragon, one First of the Dragons, and two Meteor Black Comet Dragons. These fusions are obviously going to interact with Dragon's Mirror or RedEyes Fusion, one Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, one Trishula Dragon of the Ice Barrier, one Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, one Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, one Clear Wing Synchro Dragon, one Samsara Dragon of Rebirth, one RedEyes Flare Metal Dragon, one number 11 Big Eye, one Castel the Skyblaster Musketeer, one Abyss Dweller, and one Gaga Samurai. For the bare bones RedEyes component build, the idea is to limit the RedEyes component to only elements that directly assist the Disaster Dragon aspect of the deck. The deck build looks as followed. For the RedEyes monster component, I simply run one copy of RedEyes Darkness Metal and two copies of RedEyes Retro Dragon for insight discarding purposes. I do not run any of the high-level RedEyes monsters other than Metal, because this version of the deck runs enough tribute monsters in its Disaster Dragon component already. Running any high-level RedEyes without going full board RedEyes just creates inefficiency. For the remaining monsters, I take a lot of inspiration from my Disaster Dragon Pure build. The tribute monsters are one copy of Divine Dragon Lord Felgran, to supplement the usefulness of Darkness Metal and other revival elements in this deck through its useful banish from graveyard or field one opponent monster, two copies of Dragon Spirit of White as another quality metal summoning target and free back row destruction, two copies of Swartzchild Limit Dragon for trade-in fodder, smaller monster cleanup, tribute fodder, and XZ plays. The non-tribute monsters are, not surprisingly, three copies of Koa'ki Meiru Drago to maximize light and darkness lockdown, two copies of Keeper of the Shrine for defensive purposes and tribute fodder, three copies of Assault Wyvern, and one copy of the White Stone of Ancients. In contrast to the pure build, this deck does not lean as much on synchro elements, because the addition of RedEyes Insight makes Darkness Metal dumping much more consistent and easy, thereby making a card like Assault Wyvern much more attractive for the main deck, along with some other spell and trap elements, to focus more on Darkness Metal being the key feature of the deck. Speaking of the spells, I run three copies of the aforementioned RedEyes Insight, three copies of Dragon Shrine, which are more complemented by the different levels of revival for this build, thanks to the RedEyes elements, most notably Insight, two copies of Trade-In, down from three copies due to deck space consideration, two copies of Return of the Dragon Lords for the non-Darkness Metal related revival of monsters like Spirit and Felgrand, one copy of Upstart Goblin, one copy of Diamond Core, one copy of Raigeki, and one copy of Soul Charge, which are all generally self-explanatory. Finally, I run three copies of Book of Eclipse for, once again, turning off Drago, making the opponent's monsters easier to kill for Assault Wyvern, and stopping opponent playmaking during their turn as an interrupter, or to break existing boards at the start of my turn. For the traps, I run two copies of RedEyes Spirit for Darkness Metal Revival, three copies of Ultimate Providence as a discard agent that offers protection for Drago, as explained earlier, and one copy of Vanity's Emptiness. The extra deck for this version of the deck is rather loose. There's a lot of flexibility in my opinion. My extra deck right now is one Blue-Eyes Spirit Dragon, one High Speedroid Chanbara, one Samsara Dragon of Rebirth, one number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon, 1 Galaxy Eyes Full Armor Photon Dragon, 1 number 46 Dragoloon, 1 Galaxy Eyes Cipher Dragon, 1 number 38 Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy, 1 Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand, 1 number 23 Lancelot Ghost Knight of the Underworld, 1 number S39 Utopia the Lightning, 1 number 39 Utopia, 1 number 106 Giant Hand, 1 Castel the Skyblaster Musketeer, and 1 Galaxy Stealth Dragon. In my opinion, the advantage of the more bare-bones RedEyes hybrid is that I feel it has more versatility in its overall plays by taking advantage of the searching and setup capacity of Insight without having to burden itself with the general limitations of the RedEyes archetype. However, there is some potential inefficiency in this bare-bones build because Insight only has 2 search targets in the 2 copies of Spirit. Fortunately, though, that inefficiency is only a minor detriment to the deck and can be resolved by adding other targets for those who are more bothered by it. The worst matchup for this deck is, in my opinion, ABCs, for if Dragon Buster banishes Darkness Metal, the overall power of this deck almost collapses. This is more true in the RedEyes Dominant, which is one of the reasons I tend to like running those Escape to help manage that potential problem. Unfortunately, though, Metafoes can also be an annoying deck because of the limited effectiveness of Drago at restricting their plays due to their fire element, but that's why side decks exist. Well, those are my 2 types of RedEyes Disaster Dragon hybrid decks. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.